Let's travel together back in time, all the way to the golden age of American animation. If we take a closer look behind the doors of the studios that were responsible for the creation of some of our most beloved animated films, we would see that during that period, there was generally an industry-wide bias against women. The animation industry was considered to be a man's world. Women were discouraged by the studios to pursue any creative position, and there was an unbreakable glass ceiling in the industry. But as it turns out, there were still women who managed to overcome all those substantial obstacles and contribute greatly to the animation world. One of the first ladies who quietly started breaking down the gender barriers was Lillian Friedman Astor, who became the first female lead animator within the studio system with a screen credit. Before Lillian's surprising promotion, women were only allowed to work in the so-called ink and paint departments because of the assumption that most of them would only work for a couple of years till they get married, as well as the general belief that because of the technical aspects of the medium, it can only be done by men.
Is that clear?
The work in that department wasn't considered to be creative, and the women were not respected as artists in the studio system. Well, in reality, inking and coloring was often a physically and mentally exhausting job that required skills, talent, and a lot of practice, and was just as important and intense as any other part of the animation production. During the making of the first animated feature film, the inkers and painters at Disney had to work around 85 hours a week, going over hundreds of thousands of cells. And despite the discrimination the ladies had to put up with, they all felt extremely lucky that they were working on animation films. Most of them didn't even consider a possibility that one day they would be able to work as animators or even create their own animated films. This is why Lillian Friedman Astor was considered to be like a goddess among her female colleagues in the industry. After working for just a few years as an inker, her talent was noticed by animator James Seamus Culhane, who became her mentor, and in 1933, she was promoted to head animator. Although this was clearly a historical offer for a woman in the animation field, in her interviews, Friedman says that it took a lot of persuasion to accept it because of the fear of being a female animator in an industry where it is generally believed that women are simply not good at making animation. Lillian was part of bringing to life legendary and beloved characters like Popeye and Betty Boop, but her position as animator came, of course, with many downsides. Friedman was paid only $40 a week, far less than her female colleagues, and was credited for only 6 of the 11 films she had worked on. After Lillian didn't join a strike of the studio in 1939 because of different beliefs, she was harassed by her colleagues and her career came to a premature termination. She resigned and never came back to animation again.
I love doing animation, and I think I was good at it. Thank you.
Meanwhile, in the Mouse House, 2 women helped develop animation from silly joke-ridden cartoons to the moving, emotional stories that future generations fell in love with and still do. Bianca Majoli elevated the art of animated storytelling as she brought an entirely different, more emotional perspective on stories. In 1936, she came up with a touching narrative that is considered to be the inspiration for the famous Dumbo animation, produced several years later. Legendary Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston even commented on the significance of her work with the words, "We could not have made any of the feature films without learning this important lesson. Pathos gives comedy the heart and warmth that keeps it from becoming brittle." Despite the game-changing contribution to the studio, just 5 years after the start of her career, Majoli was unceremoniously fired, but her work was handed to another female story artist and her former colleague, Sylvia Moberly Holland. Moberly Holland became the closest any woman has ever gotten to being a director at Disney to the very recent year of 2012, when Jennifer Lee finally broke the glass ceiling and became the first female director of a Walt Disney Animation Studios feature film. The work of Moberly Holland as being a woman in charge of a team of animators came, of course, with a lot of drama, like the other ladies before her, as her male colleagues transferred to different departments because they refused to take orders from a girl and didn't want to work for her on the fairy sequence from one of Disney's most legendary films, Fantasia. Even with the constant rotation of artists, Sylvia Moberly Holland managed to lead her team to make one of the most beautiful sequences in the film. After the release of Fantasia, the animation industry and Walt Disney's ongoing success were suddenly disrupted by the start of World War II. Due to the cutback of male staff because of military service, in 1941, Disney finally gave an opportunity to a small group of women from the ink and paint department to be trained as animators. One of those women was Retta Scott, the girl who managed to create one of the most terrifying scenes in animation history that has been scaring generations of children to this day. After catching the attention of director Dave Hand and of Walt himself, Retta was given the opportunity to animate some of the scenes for their new feature film. She not only managed to deliver, but her animation was so impressive and unique that the rest of the animation crew commented later in interviews that no one could have done a better job in bringing those characters to life than Retta herself. In 1942, almost 10 years after Lillian Friedman asked her, Retta Scott became the first woman animator working for Disney to ever get a screen credit for her work. The views about female creatives in the animation industry had slowly begun to change, and one woman was about to help shatter them completely. Almost at the same time as Retta Scott, the Disney animation crew was joined by animator Lee Blair's wife, Mary, who rose to become one of the most influential artists in American animation. The work of Mary Blair caused a complete transformation in the look of Disney animation. Her unique bold color use, simple flat imagery, and the incredible simplicity of storytelling in her images is what marked her style that Walt Disney adopted as his company's standard, and what inspires animators and illustrators till this very day. Many artists say that there is something magical to her art that no one has ever managed to recreate. After the great impact of Mary Blair's work, during the late 40s and 50s, already dozens of women were working in traditionally male positions, occupying a bigger part of the animation departments, although almost every one of them didn't make the pages of history books, and very little is known about their work today. What women add into the colorful world of animation, even only based on this handful of early examples of pioneering figures, is different and fresh perspectives, backgrounds, ideas that can only enrich and help move the animation industry and filmmaking forward. Gender balance is still non-existent in many animation studios today. However, things are slowly and steadily improving, and we have more and more impressive examples of successful women in the industry that can inspire others for greatness. By learning and understanding the past and the events and people who shaped the animation industry to its state today, hopefully more and more aspiring female artists, animators, and filmmakers would feel empowered to not hold back and to continue breaking the boundaries, and to one day become the same source of inspiration for others as their foremothers from the golden years of animation.